It was just another ordinary day in Chicago. One of those rainy, gloomy Tuesday mornings that seemed to drag on forever. The kind of day when the gray clouds hang low, blocking out the sun, and the streets are slick with water. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of wet pavement and the distant hum of city life. I had no particular plans, but I found myself walking through the familiar streets, the sound of my boots echoing against the sidewalk as I made my way to my favorite thrift store. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but I always enjoyed hunting for something unique, a forgotten treasure, something that would add a little mystery to my life. The thrift store was tucked away on a quiet street, hidden among the other small shops and cafes. Its old wooden sign swayed in the wind, creaking in time with the rhythm of the storm. As soon as I stepped inside, the familiar musty smell hit me. The kind of smell you get when old books and antiques sit in a room untouched for years. Shelves were packed with dusty knickknacks, old furniture, and various trinkets that once belonged to people long gone. It was like walking into someone else's memory, and I always felt like I was browsing through history, wondering who had owned each item before it ended up here. I wandered down the aisles aimlessly, running my fingers over the spines of old books, the edges of porcelain figurines, and the rough texture of old leather chairs. Most of the stuff here wasn't anything extraordinary, just remnants of someone's past. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the weather, the quiet, or maybe it was just the strange energy in the air. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to find something unusual. And then I saw it, tucked away in the farthest corner of the store, almost hidden behind a dusty stack of old records, was a large mirror. It stood tall, its surface slightly fogged, its frame covered in layers of grime. The frame was intricate, twisted metal that seemed to swirl around itself like tendrils, reaching out to something unseen. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Most mirrors you find in thrift stores are simple, practical, but this one was different. It had an eerie, almost gothic quality to it, as if it belonged in an old mansion, or more fittingly, a haunted house. The mirror had a certain heaviness to it, like it was more than just a reflective surface. I took a few steps closer. My curiosity piqued. The closer I got, the more the mirror seemed to pull me in, almost as if it was beckoning me. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, wondering what it was doing in such a place. There was no tag, no price on it. It almost felt like it didn't belong, like it had found its way here by mistake. As I stood there, my mind began to wander. I could almost hear the whispers of the past in the silence of the store. The faint echoes of people long gone. I raised my hand and gently wiped away some of the dust from the mirror's surface. The action felt almost instinctive, like I had done this 1,000 times before. The mirror's surface cleared, revealing my reflection. But as I looked into it, I felt something was off. The reflection wasn't exactly the same. My face appeared too still, too frozen. It was as if the image in the mirror wasn't quite me, but a distorted version of myself, trapped in an endless moment. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. It was probably just the odd angle or the dirty surface playing tricks on my eyes. But even as I thought that, I couldn't shake the unease that was creeping up my spine. It felt like something was watching me through that reflection. I took a step back, feeling my heart rate quicken. I had seen old mirrors before, some with strange engravings or unusual frames, but this one felt different. I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard a voice behind me, low and soft. It was the shopkeeper, an old man with a hunched back and a face full of wrinkles that seemed to carry years of forgotten stories. He had been watching me from across the room, and now he shuffled over to where I stood. "That's an interesting piece, isn't it?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There was something in the way he spoke, a hesitation, like he was afraid to say too much. His eyes were narrow. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded, glancing back at the mirror. "Yeah, it's unusual." The old man stepped closer, his eyes still locked on the mirror. "It's been here for years," he said, almost as if to himself. "People say it has a strange history." I raised an eyebrow, my interest piqued. "What kind of history?" He paused, his eyes flicking nervously to the mirror, before he spoke again. "Some say it shows more than just your reflection. It shows the past, a bloody past, a dangerous one." I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was just another one of those tall tales shopkeepers like to tell to sell odd items. But something about his expression made me pause. He didn't seem like the type to joke. He seemed afraid. "What do you mean, bloody past?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. The shopkeeper's face grew darker, his voice dropping even lower. "People who have looked into it, well, they say they've seen things from the past. Horrible things. Some have even claimed to see people, long dead, staring back at them. Victims of murder. Souls trapped in the mirror." I could feel a shiver run down my spine, but I still wasn't ready to believe it. "That sounds kind of crazy, don't you think?" The old man didn't respond at first. He just stood there, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at the mirror, as if he was reliving something in his mind. Finally, he looked back at me, his eyes wide, almost pleading. "I'm just telling you what people have said, what's happened to them. You should be careful with that one." At that moment, I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as another one of those creepy stories people tell for fun. But another part of me, the part that had been staring into that mirror for the last few minutes, was beginning to feel uneasy. The mirror had an unsettling pull to it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced back at it, and for just a brief second, I could have sworn the reflection wasn't quite right. My own face, staring back at me, seemed different, like it wasn't me at all, but something else entirely. Still, I shook the feeling off. "I'm sure it's just an old mirror," I said, trying to sound casual. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something about that mirror wasn't quite right. It wasn't just a reflection. It was something more. Something I didn't fully understand. But for some reason, I couldn't walk away from it. As I left the shop that day, the mirror stayed in my mind. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like it had a story to tell. And I was about to find out just how far that story would go. That was the first time I encountered the mirror, but it wouldn't be the last. That night, I couldn't get the mirror out of my head. The shopkeeper's words echoed in my mind, mingling with the uneasy feeling that had settled deep in my chest. A bloody past, a dangerous one. I found myself staring at the ceiling in my dimly lit bedroom, the rain tapping against the window, as though the storm itself was trying to warn me. I couldn't shake the image of the mirror, tucked away in that corner of the thrift store, its surface dusty and old. Something about it had called to me, something I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the craftsmanship, the intricate frame, or even the odd history the shopkeeper had shared. It was the mirror itself. I tried to push the thoughts aside, telling myself it was nothing more than an old relic, a curiosity from a bygone era. But that didn't stop the feeling that something was waiting for me in that mirror. Something dark. I knew I shouldn't have, but the temptation was too strong. I had to have it. The way the shopkeeper had spoken about it, the fear in his eyes, it all intrigued me. So after dinner, I grabbed my coat, went back to the thrift store, and bought the mirror. Carrying it back home was more difficult than I anticipated. Not because of its size. It wasn't huge, just a large wall mirror. But because of the strange weight it seemed to carry. It felt heavier than it should have been. As I walked through the door of my apartment, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following me, though I knew I was alone. I had no logical reason for it, but the eerie sensation wouldn't let go. Once inside, I placed the mirror against the wall opposite my bed. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting long, ghostly shadows across the room. I ran my fingers over the frame once again, brushing away more layers of dust. The intricate carvings of the frame now seemed more deliberate, like something ancient had been etched into it, symbols I hadn't noticed earlier. I hadn't been able to see them clearly in the store, but now, in the dim light of my room, I could make them out more distinctly. They looked like words, but not in any language I recognized. I told myself it was nothing, that my mind was simply playing tricks on me, but the unease lingered. I moved back, standing in front of the mirror, eyes locked on my own reflection. For a moment, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just me, standing in my bedroom, looking a little more tired than usual. The rain continued to fall outside, and the soft hum of the city was a comforting background noise. But as I stood there, staring at my reflection, something shifted in the air. The room felt colder, and the edges of the mirror seemed to darken, like shadows creeping in from the corners of the glass. I took a step closer to the mirror. My own reflection moved as I did, but then, just for a split second, something was off. In the corner of the reflection, something appeared. A figure. It wasn't in the room with me, but it was unmistakably in the mirror. A man. I froze, staring at the figure that had suddenly materialized in the reflection. His face was twisted in pain, his eyes wide with terror. His features were gaunt, like someone who hadn't eaten in days. His skin was pale, almost as if... I blinked. The figure didn't disappear immediately. Instead, he seemed to shift slightly, his head tilting to one side, as though trying to get a better look at me. My heart slammed in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. I stepped back quickly, away from the mirror, my mind racing. I didn't know what to think. I wanted to turn away, to look anywhere but at the mirror, but I couldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the reflection. The figure in the mirror stared back at me with such intensity that it felt like his eyes were burning into me. I reached out, almost as if to touch the glass, to prove to myself that it wasn't real. But before my hand made contact, the figure's face contorted into something worse, into something twisted, something filled with unimaginable pain. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. The reflection returned to normal. I was standing alone in my room. Just me and the empty space before the mirror. I stood there, frozen, heart pounding in my chest. My breath was shallow, the weight of the experience pressing down on me. My first instinct was to laugh it off, to convince myself it was a trick of Galite, my mind playing tricks on me. After all, I'd just bought the mirror, and my mind was probably overactive, feeding on stories of haunted objects and creepy legends. I tried to shake the feeling, telling myself it was just fatigue, that I had been working too much lately. But no matter how much I tried to dismiss it, the image of the man, bound and bleeding, stayed with me. His eyes, those wide, terrified eyes, kept flashing in my mind. It wasn't just my imagination. I knew what I had seen, and deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I turned away from the mirror, too rattled to stay any longer in front of it. I sat on the edge of my bed, my mind spinning. I tried to rationalize what I'd just witnessed. Maybe it was a trick of the light, the dark shadows playing with my vision. I kept telling myself that. But when I glanced at the mirror again, just a quick glance, I saw something else. The reflection was unchanged. There I was, sitting on the bed, staring at the mirror. But in the corner, just at the edge of my peripheral vision, I saw the faintest movement, a shadow. I turned to look directly at it, but nothing was there. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Maybe it was just my nerves, or maybe it was some strange trick of the mind. But a small part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me from within that mirror. Something that didn't belong in this world. Something that had been trapped there for far too long. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to destroy the mirror, throw it out the window, and never look at it again. But I also knew that some part of me, was drawn to it. It was like the mirror held a secret, something I wasn't supposed to know, something I needed to understand. I couldn't just walk away from it. Not now. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I kept staring at the mirror, even when my eyes were closed. The image of the man, bound and helpless, haunted me. I could still hear his silent scream in my mind, feel the weight of his terror. The next morning, I awoke to find myself staring directly at the mirror, as if the night had never passed. I didn't know what to think anymore, but I knew I had to figure out what was going on. The mirror had shown me something real, and I had to know the truth. What was it? And why had it shown me that man? As the days went on, the mirror's grip on me only tightened. Each time I looked into it, I couldn't help but feel that I was seeing something more, something I wasn't meant to see. The figure, the man, the agony in his eyes. It was just the beginning. I had no idea how deep the mystery ran, but I knew one thing. I was tangled up in something far darker than I had ever imagined. The first vision was just the beginning. The rest would follow, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was coming next. The days that followed were anything but normal. At first, I brushed off the oddities as nothing more than the result of my overactive imagination, perhaps even some lingering effects of stress or lack of sleep. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't ignore the increasingly unsettling occurrences that seemed to be tied to the mirror. It started small, subtle, almost easy to dismiss. But the more it happened, the more it became impossible to deny that something was happening. Something that couldn't be explained away. It began with the whispers. At first, they were so faint that I thought I might have imagined them. Late at night, as I lay in bed, I would hear them. Just a soft, rustling sound, barely perceptible, like the faint murmur of voices carried on the wind. I tried to ignore them, but as I lay there in the dark, listening to the soft patter of rain against the window. I could hear it clearer. It wasn't just the wind. It was as if someone was speaking, whispering, but their words were distorted, faint. I would roll over and pull the blankets tighter around me, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. It was nothing. But then, one night, as I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to will myself to sleep, I heard a voice distinctly. It was low, raspy, and so close, it felt like the speaker was in the room with me. "Help us," the voice rasped, the words dragged out in a haunting whisper that chilled me to the core. The voice sounded desperate, almost pleading, and it seemed to come from all around me, as if the room itself was speaking. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was silent. There was no one there, no sign of anything that could have made that noise. I glanced over at the mirror, which now stood against the wall, as it had since the day I brought it home. It looked just as still, just as ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. It felt alive. I told myself that it was just a bad dream or a trick of the mind. The next few nights, the whispers came again, but this time they weren't just faint murmurs in the distance. They were louder, clearer, and much more urgent. "Help us," the voice would rasp again. But now it felt more like a command than a plea. Sometimes the whispers would come in a faint chorus, different voices, layered over each other, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Other times, they would repeat the same phrase over and over again, as if trying to make me listen. "Help us, help us, help us." Each time, I would jump out of bed and rush to the mirror, my heart racing in my chest. I would stare into the glass, half expecting to see something, anything, an explanation. But there was nothing. The room reflected back at me, exactly as it had been. No figures, no shadows, just me, staring at myself with wide eyes. Still, the whispers didn't stop. They only grew louder, more intense. They were always there, soft, insistent, as if the very walls of my apartment were pressing in on me. They seemed to come from within the mirror, from behind the glass, but the source was never visible. I couldn't understand what they wanted, what they were asking for. "Who are you?" I would ask aloud, my voice trembling in the silence. But the only response was the same desperate whisper, "Help us." One night, after hours of restless tossing and turning, I finally snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant murmuring, the pressure of the unseen voices, it was too much. I rushed to the mirror and stood there, hands trembling as I reached out and placed my palm flat against the cold surface. The moment my fingers made contact, the room seemed to change. The temperature dropped, and the air grew heavy, suffocating. The whispers intensified, now accompanied by the faintest echoes of footsteps, of something moving just beyond the edge of my vision. "Help us," came the voice again, But this time it wasn't just a whisper. It was louder, more distinct. A male voice, gruff and filled with pain, cut through the air. "Please," it said, "you have to help us." I froze, my hand still pressed against the mirror. I was no longer certain whether this was a dream or if something truly was happening. The voice continued, its words carrying a weight of sorrow and despair that seemed to pierce through my very soul. Chicago was soaked in blood, so much blood. The voice trailed off, leaving a lingering chill in the air. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it all. But before I could pull my hand away, the whispers returned, louder than before, swirling around me in a maddening spiral. And in that moment, I understood. These weren't just random voices. These were souls. Trapped souls, calling out from the past, from a time long gone, trying to communicate through the glass. But why? What did they want from me? It wasn't until later, when I did some research, that the pieces started to fall into place. I had heard bits and pieces of Chicago's violent past, but now, as the whispers grew more insistent, I began to dig deeper. The city had a dark history, one that many tried to forget. There were stories of violence, of betrayal, of blood-soaked streets from a time long before the modern city had been built. Chicago in the late 1800s and early 1900s had been a place where gang wars, corruption, and senseless killings ran rampant. People had died, their lives stolen by the greed and cruelty that festered in the city's underbelly. It was a time when the streets were filled with danger and no one was safe. And now, it seemed, the mirror was showing me a fragment of that past. The souls of the forgotten, the ones who had been lost in the bloodshed, were trying to reach out from the other side. I began to listen more closely, and what I heard made my blood run cold. The voices weren't just speaking of random deaths. They spoke of specific events, of murders that had never been solved, of betrayals that had led to the loss of innocent lives. One voice, in particular, seemed to call out to me more than the rest. It was a woman's voice, soft and sorrowful, though laced with fear. "They killed him," the woman whispered one night, the words slipping out in a ragged breath. "They killed him, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't save him." The voices were becoming more coherent, and I couldn't help but feel that I was on the verge of discovering something horrific that I wasn't meant to know. The more I listened, the more I realized these were not just random voices. These were people who had died violently, their souls unable to find peace. They were trapped, forever bound to the mirror, to the city's bloody past. I began to dread the nights, to dread the whispers that would invade my room, that would press in on me from all directions. It felt like the past was coming to life before my very eyes, like the mirror was opening a window to something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. And yet, the whispers grew stronger as though they were trying to tell me something more, something important. I had to know more. I had to uncover the truth behind the voices. But every time I stood in front of the mirror, my heart would race, and I would hear them again. The faint murmurs growing louder. The voices from the past calling out, desperate for someone to listen. And as the whispers filled my ears, I knew one thing for certain. I was becoming more than just a listener. I was becoming a part of their story, a part of their unfinished business. And there was no turning back. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The whispers, the figure in the mirror, the endless feeling of being watched. It was too much to dismiss as coincidence. Something was happening, something far beyond my understanding, and I needed answers. I couldn't just let this mystery hang over me, consuming my every thought, my every night. I had to know the truth. I had to understand what was going on, and what I had gotten myself involved in. So, I started researching. I knew Chicago had a dark past, but the more I dug, the more I realized that the city I thought I knew was nothing like the one that existed a century ago. I began to read about its history, the city's rise, the struggles, and the bloodshed. The early 1900s in particular had been a time of chaos. Prohibition had brought about an era of lawlessness, with gangsters and corrupt politicians ruling the streets. The city was a boiling pot of crime, corruption, and violence. But the more I read, the more one name kept surfacing. At first, I didn't recognize the name. But as I dug deeper into the murky depths of Chicago's criminal past, I learned about Grayson's brutal legacy. He had been a notorious gangster, feared by both the police and his rivals. His reign of terror had lasted for years, and he had left a trail of blood wherever he went. It was said that Samuel Grayson had no mercy. His victims were often found in gruesome states, beaten, disfigured, sometimes even mutilated. He didn't just kill for money or power. He killed for the sheer thrill of it, for the power it gave him over others. It was as if he derived a sick satisfaction from inflicting pain and suffering. But as I read more, something started to stand out, a detail that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just his murders that had become legendary. It was the rumors surrounding his final days. As his reign of terror continued, the police were closing in on him. Grayson had become more reckless, more violent, and soon the law caught up. He was cornered, and it seemed like his time was running out. But then, something strange happened. Legend had it that before he was caught, Grayson had made a pact with a dark force. The exact details were unclear, but the stories were all the same. In exchange for his freedom, he had promised his soul to something far darker than the world had ever known. Some believed it was a deal with the devil himself. Others thought it was with an ancient entity that thrived on the souls of the damned. Either way, the result was the same. Grayson was promised protection from the law, from the world that sought to punish him, in exchange for his soul being trapped in a mirror. A mirror that would hold him for eternity, unable to escape. The mirror was said to be a prison, a cursed object that could not be destroyed. It would be passed from hand to hand, from place to place, always carrying Grayson's tormented soul, always waiting for the next person to come along and release him. At first, I couldn't believe it. It sounded like a story too wild to be true. But the more I read, the more everything started to fall into place. It was as if the pieces of a puzzle that I had been trying to figure out for weeks were finally coming together. The mirror wasn't just a haunted object. It was Grayson's prison. His soul had been trapped in it, and now, for some reason, I had stumbled upon it. I had brought it into my home, and in doing so, I had unwittingly freed him. It hit me like a wave. The whispers, the voices, the figure I had seen in the mirror. It was all him. Samuel Grayson wasn't just a ghost. He was still alive, in a sense. His soul was trapped, bound to the mirror, unable to escape. And now that I had brought the mirror into my life, I had unknowingly opened the door for him to communicate with the world again. But why? What was he trying to tell me? And what did he want from me? I couldn't stop the thoughts from swirling in my head. Grayson had made a deal, a pact, and now his soul was trying to get out. The mirror, the thing I had thought was nothing more than an antique, was more than just a cursed object. It was the key to unlocking something terrible. As the pieces continued to fall into place, I began to realize that my connection to the mirror went far deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just a simple mistake. It was as if fate had led me here, led me to Grayson's prison, to this mirror that had been passed down through the years. How many others had come before me? How many had fallen victim to the curse of the mirror, only to be haunted by the tormented soul trapped within? I found myself staring at the mirror more and more, despite the dread that grew inside of me. I couldn't stop myself. There was something about it, something compelling, that made me want to understand it, to know what was happening. But every time I looked into the glass, I saw something new, something more disturbing. The figure, his agonized face twisted in pain, would appear again and again. His eyes would lock onto mine, and I would feel his presence, cold and suffocating, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Grayson wasn't just trying to communicate with me. He was trying to make me a part of his story, a part of the curse that had bound him for so long. He wanted me to help him escape, to finish the deal that he had made all those years ago. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't let myself fall into his trap. I had to find a way to stop him before it was too late. I started looking into how to destroy the mirror, how to put an end to the curse once and for all. But no matter how much I searched, no solution seemed to come. It was as if the mirror was invincible, like it was meant to keep Grayson trapped forever. Some people claimed that the only way to destroy the mirror was to destroy the soul inside it. But how could I do that? How could I defeat a spirit that had made a pact with a dark force? The more I searched, the more I realized that I was running out of time. Grayson was getting stronger, more powerful with each passing day. His presence in the mirror was becoming harder to ignore. The whispers had turned into calls, desperate pleas for help, for release. It was as if he was reaching out to me, trying to make me part of his prison, part of the torment that had been building for so long.
I knew I had to act quickly. The mirror wasn't just an object. It was a vessel. A prison that held a piece of Chicago's dark history. A history soaked in blood. And if I didn't find a way to put an end to it, I would become just another chapter in the story of Samuel Grayson and the cursed mirror. The more I investigated, the more I realized the terrible truth. The mirror wasn't just a cursed object. It was something far more insidious. At first, I had thought it was simply haunted, that it contained the restless spirits of those who had been victims of Samuel Grayson's crimes. But as I delved deeper, I began to understand that it wasn't just a mirror. It was a gateway, a portal between worlds, and it wasn't just showing the past. It was trying to pull me into it, trying to make me part of something much darker, something far older than I could have ever imagined. Samuel Grayson's presence in the mirror had grown stronger. I had thought that after learning about his dark pact, after understanding the history of the mirror, that I could control it, that I could stop whatever was happening. But I was wrong. The more I tried to ignore it, the more the mirror seemed to demand my attention. It was like an addiction, drawing me in, pulling me closer with every passing day. I began to see more disturbing visions. Fragments of a history I didn't want to witness. Blood-stained streets, alleyways filled with the echoes of screams, ghostly figures clawing at the glass, their faces twisted in horror. I saw them every time I looked into the mirror, each vision more vivid than the last. But the most chilling sight of all was Samuel Grayson himself. His face appearing more often now. His twisted grin, always following me. At first, I tried to fight it. I would look away, shut my eyes, tell myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind. But it didn't help. The mirror was always there, waiting, silently beckoning me. I could feel its presence, even when I wasn't in the same room. It was like a constant pressure on my chest, a weight that never seemed to lift. I knew I couldn't keep ignoring it. The mirror was alive, in some way, feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every vision, every whisper, every time I let my gaze linger on its surface. One night, the visions became unbearable. It was just after midnight, and the apartment was unusually silent. The rain had stopped,
leaving behind a thick fog that clung to the streets like a ghost. I was in my bedroom, pacing back and forth, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had taken root in my stomach. The mirror, as always, was opposite my bed, its surface reflecting the dim light of the room. I couldn't stop staring at it, even though every part of me screamed to look away. Suddenly, the air grew colder. I felt the temperature drop, a chill that spread through my body, making me shiver involuntarily. The mirror's surface rippled like water disturbed by an invisible hand. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. I had seen the surface ripple before, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a small fluctuation. The entire surface seemed to shimmer and distort, like the mirror was alive, like it was breathing. The reflection in the mirror began to warp and twist, stretching out of shape in ways that didn't make sense. I took a cautious step forward, my eyes fixed on the glass. The vision that appeared before me was not my own reflection. No longer was I looking at myself, standing in my bedroom. Instead, the scene in the mirror had shifted. The street outside was gone. Now, I stood in a dark alleyway, its walls stained with the remains of blood. The air was thick with smoke, and the distant sound of sirens echoed through the streets, muffled by the oppressive silence. It was Chicago, but it wasn't the Chicago I knew. This was a version of the city from decades ago, from the time of Grayson's reign of terror. I could see the ghosts again, shadowy figures moving in and out of sight, their faces obscured by the mist that swirled around them. They clawed at the glass, desperate to escape, their fingers leaving smudged marks on the surface as they pressed against it. I could hear their cries, soft whispers of pain and anguish, coming from the mirror itself. I had seen this before, but this time it felt different, more real. The weight of the scene was suffocating. I could almost smell the blood, feel the stench of death in the air. And then, amidst the chaos, I saw him, Samuel Grayson. He was standing in the middle of the alley, his figure unmistakable, even through the fog. His tall frame was draped in shadows, but I could still make out his features, his sharp jawline, the cold glint in his eyes. But it was his smile that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a twisted grin, a mockery of the joy he had once felt as he slaughtered those he considered beneath him. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I thought he could see me. Not just my reflection, but me. Join me. His voice echoed through the mirror, a deep, guttural tone that sent a shiver crawling down my spine. There was no mistaking the venom in his words. Become part of the collection. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. The words didn't make sense. What did he mean? Part of the collection. What was he talking about? Before I could move away, the surface of the mirror rippled again, and this time, something was different. A cold, clammy feeling wrapped around my wrist. I looked down, and to my horror, I saw a hand. Dark, shadowy, and skeletal, reaching out from the mirror. It was grasping me, pulling me toward the glass. My body went rigid with fear. The grip was firm, cold as ice, and it seemed to burn through my skin. I tried to pull away, to break free, but the hand only tightened. I could feel the weight of Grayson's presence behind me, looming, suffocating. His voice rang in my ears, louder this time, more desperate. Join me. Become part of the collection. There is no escape.
I struggled, my pulse racing as I pulled with all my strength, but the grip didn't loosen. It was as if the mirror had become a living thing, feeding off my fear, feeding off my very soul. It wasn't just showing me a vision anymore. It was trying to pull me into it. The glass seemed to stretch, to bend, warping around me as I was slowly drawn closer. I could feel the cold, icy fingers of the mirror closing around my wrist, pulling me toward it, toward the darkness inside. In that moment, I realized the full extent of the mirror's curse. It wasn't just a portal to the past, it was a prison. A prison for Grayson's soul, yes, but also a trap for anyone who looked too long, anyone who dared to get too close. The mirror wasn't just showing the past, it was absorbing the present, pulling people in, turning them into part of the collection of souls trapped inside. With every ounce of strength, I wrenched my arm free, stumbling back from the mirror. My breath was ragged, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had narrowly escaped being pulled into it, but I knew now that I wasn't free. Grayson's spirit had a hold on me. The mirror's curse was stronger than I could have ever imagined, and I knew that I couldn't avoid it much longer. The mirror had shown me a glimpse of what it wanted, and I understood now. It wasn't just a haunting, it was an invitation. It was calling me, pulling me in, and it wouldn't stop until I was part of its twisted collection. I had to destroy the mirror, but how? How could I destroy something that seemed to have such power, such a hold over me? And would I be able to break free before it consumed me completely? The curse was growing stronger, and I knew I had no time to waste. I knew I had to destroy the mirror. There was no other choice. It was the only way to break the curse, to free myself from the grip that Samuel Grayson's soul had on me. But as the days passed, I realized that it wasn't going to be easy. The more I tried to distance myself from the mirror, the stronger Samuel's presence became. It was as if the mirror was no longer just an object. It had become an entity, a force that would stop at nothing to keep me in its grip. Every time I moved it, every time I tried to even touch it, the house seemed to shake. The walls groaned, the floors creaked beneath my feet, and the air grew thick with tension. I could feel the mirror's power pulsing through the house, like a living thing twisting around me.
whispers had become more than just faint murmurs now. They had turned into screams, agonizing, blood-curdling screams that echoed through the house at all hours of the day and night. The voices of the dead, the victims of Grayson's reign of terror, cried out for release, for justice, but the sound was twisted, distorted, as if they were all trapped in the same endless nightmare. I could no longer stand it. The voices were driving me mad. The night I finally decided to end it. I had no other option but to confront the mirror once and for all. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I had to destroy it, whatever it took. I moved through my apartment with a sense of finality. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow, as I stood in front of the mirror one last time. The room felt colder than it ever had before, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. Samuel's presence was so strong now that it felt like he was standing right behind me, his cold breath on my neck, his shadow looming over my every move. I could hear him in my head, his voice low and menacing, whispering in that dark, guttural tone. "You can't escape," he said. "You belong to me now, forever." I ignored him. I had to. There was no turning back. I had made up my mind, and there was only one way to break free. I took a deep breath and grabbed the mirror by its cold, trembling frame. For a moment, I hesitated. The reflection in the glass stared back at me. My own face, pale and wide-eyed with fear. But something in my chest told me it wasn't just my reflection anymore. It was Samuel's eyes staring back at me. His twisted grin lingered in the corner of the glass. Like a ghost, waiting to reach out and drag me back into the darkness. But I couldn't back down now. I gritted my teeth and yanked the mirror off the wall, the weight of it nearly pulling me off my feet. As soon as it was free from its place, the room seemed to shake again, more violently this time. The walls rattled, the windows rattled, and the very foundation of the apartment seemed to tremble with energy. The whispering voices reached a crescendo, becoming unbearable. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the mirror to the ground with every ounce of strength I could muster. The glass shattered with a deafening crack, the sound reverberating through the room like a scream. The sharp edges of the shards scattered across the floor, glittering in the dim light. For a moment, everything was still. The silence that followed was almost suffocating, and I dared not breathe. I stood there, my heart racing, my eyes wide as I waited for something, anything, to happen. But then something strange happened. The air grew colder, far colder than it should have been. I could see my breath fogging in the frigid air, despite the heat still running in the apartment. The temperature had plummeted, but it wasn't just the cold that made me freeze in place. It was the feeling that something was still watching me, something that had not gone away. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me. I turned around, heart pounding in my chest. The room, though seemingly normal, felt heavy, suffocating. The air was thick, dense with an unnatural presence. The ghosts, the lost souls, the victims of Grayson's cruelty, they were still here. I could feel them, hear them, their restless energy crawling beneath my skin. They were still trapped, still tormented, and they were not going to leave. And worse still, I could hear Samuel's voice, faint but unmistakable, lingering in the room like a distant echo. "You think you've escaped," he whispered, his voice mocking and cold. "But you're wrong. You'll never escape." I staggered back, panic rising in my chest. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. The mirror was shattered. It should have been over, but the curse was still there, still clinging to me, still tied to this place. The ghosts of Chicago's blood-soaked past lingered, their faces twisted in torment, their eyes hollow with despair. And Samuel's spirit, no longer bound to the mirror, was free. But he wasn't gone. I backed away from the shattered pieces of glass on the floor, my legs trembling beneath me. I knew, deep down, that the destruction of the mirror hadn't freed me. It had only unleashed something worse. Samuel's spirit wasn't trapped in the glass anymore, but he was still hunting for a new host. I wasn't safe. None of us were. I tried to hold it together. I had to think. I had to get out of here. I turned, stumbling toward the door. But the moment my hand touched the handle, the air seemed to grow even thicker. The weight of it pressed against me, pushing me down, and I felt the coldness that had started in the mirror now settle into my very bones. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, darker, as though they were stretching toward me, pulling me back into the depths of the nightmare. I pulled the door open and ran, not looking back. I didn't care about anything else anymore. I just needed to get out. I needed to escape. As I fled down the stairs, my breath coming in short gasps, I could feel the presence still hanging over me. It wasn't just in the apartment. It was in the streets, in the air, in every corner of the city. Samuel Grayson's curse had never truly ended. It had merely changed form. The mirror was gone, but its power remained. The horrors of Chicago's blood-soaked past would never leave. And I knew, deep in my soul, that no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to escape, the curse would follow me. Because the curse wasn't just tied to the mirror. It was tied to the city itself. It was tied to the blood spilled on the streets, to the souls lost in the chaos. And as long as that darkness remained, it would continue to hunt for new victims, new hosts to carry its burden. I had escaped the mirror, but I hadn't escaped the curse. Samuel Grayson's spirit was still out there, waiting, watching, and I knew that someday it would come for me again.